What's up guys, it's Sam here from EDMProd, and the other week I wrote an article on drum programming. Now it was quite long, it covered a lot, but it didn't cover everything. I finished it and there was still a lot that I sort of wanted to go over, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be going over, for the next few weeks, drums in the form of video, and we're going to start with adding interest and variation. So no one really wants to listen to the same one bar drum loop on repeat, and they also don't want to listen to a boring drum loop. So we're going to be addressing that issue in this video. We're going to be doing a few things. We're going to start by building a basic loop, which we can use as a foundation to add interest and variation. Then we're going to go through 5 techniques to add interest and variation, and those 5 techniques are using what we have to create interest and variation. So basically building on the foundation and not adding any samples. The 2-4-8 method, which is making something happen every 2 bars, every 4 bars, and every 8 bars. Playing with velocity, creating fills, and using effects and automation. So those 5 techniques are what we're going to be using after we've built our basic loop. So without further ado, this is a great pack here, by the way. It's the Sunnylax Studio Essentials. Turn this thing down. Okay. I'm going to be making the kind of soft progressive house beat, just because it's quite generic, and a lot of you produce different genres, but hopefully you'll take away something from this. Cool. We'll grab a clap. Okay, sounding good. We'll grab a hi-hat as well, of course. Need one of those. I'm just going to quickly EQ these. I'm not going to be mixing the drums, but just so it sounds a little bit better. And we'll also add just a simple percussion sound in here as well. So search for Tom. Duplicate this out actually. Where's the pack? Go. Cool, so I've got this simple beat here. very basic. And now I want to add some interest. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a few more hi-hats in. Now, a lot of people struggle with this. We're not moving on to the techniques yet. We're just building from this foundation. So a lot of people struggle with hi-hats. They find it hard to get a good, I suppose, groove going. What I like to do is add a ton of hi-hats, normally 5 or more. And at first that sounds overkill, but it generally works well. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be adding quite a few hi-hats just to fill in that top end. And this will add a lot more interest as well. So I'm going to duplicate this out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add swing to this. Now, if you read the article, you'd remember that I touched on swing and how it can completely change the sound of a drum section. So I'm going to be using swing 35, which is, I suppose, sort of a medium swing, very noticeable though. And you can hear the difference that this makes with the tom compared to. So that works very well. I'm going to find a hat from, where are we? This Melbourne bounce pack. Something to note here. You don't need to use sample packs for the genre they're made for. A lot of people think, oh, I need to get a sample pack for techno, I need to get a sample pack for Melbourne bounce, I need to get a sample pack for electro. If they have drum one-shots, they can be used in almost any genre. I use dubstep packs for trance. I use a Melbourne bounce pack for progressive house like I'm doing now. They're just drum sounds at the end of the day. They can be used for anything. Okay. So I'm going to pull this down a bit in case it's too loud. And I'm just going to make a different pattern than the offbeat hi-hat. Doesn't sound that desirable at the moment. We'll pull down the decay. And of course add the swing to it. One thing that happens, if you add swing to some elements and not others, you get this really incohesive sound there. It's just not good. So you want to add swing to almost everything, unless you're adding it to say one element like a shaker, which can sometimes work. That could be hat 2. Now we'll add hat 3, another one. And I sort of just keep going until it comes together. There's a point where you'll know, you just know that it works. So this one here doesn't sound that nice, but we can maybe make a 2-bar pattern here. And this is sort of verging on the interest and variation part. So we want some sounds to play often, like the offbeat hi-hat and that one there. We want other sounds to play not as regularly. So this hat here, we're going to only have play once every bar, just before the offbeat on the last beat. So like this. And we've already got that swing added because we duplicated that channel. That sounds pretty decent to me. We'll call this one hat 3. Now we'll add another one. I'm just using the same pack because there are a lot of great samples in here. And one thing to note is a lot of these sounds, these hi-hats, don't really work straight up. So if I dragged that one there earlier, number 5, it wouldn't really fit. But what I did is I pulled down the sustain and the decay so that it was less sort of in your face, if that makes sense. So this one here, I'm just going to have play every 2 bars. And And what it will basically do is strengthen that other one we've got over here. So again, adding a bit of interest and variation. So we get this. Very cool. So you can sort of see it coming together now, you know, instead of having just this basic sort of, it repeats itself. We've got a few things that add variation and a bit of replay value. That's what it comes down to. Can someone listen for a full 8 to 16 bars to the same drum loop and find new things? That's what you want to be focusing on. Now, it is, of course, genre dependent. If you're making big room or a genre that doesn't really need that much variation, then it's completely different. But for most genres of dance music, you want this variation. So we'll add another hi-hat. Almost there. And we want something to contribute a bit more to the groove. So I'm going to go and grab another hi-hat. I've got the perfect one. This is Studio Essentials Progressive House from Sennheiser. I'll leave a link to that. We'll chuck that in. So we want this one to be relatively simple pattern. Just going to make it 1 bar. So you can see what's happening there. We've got this hi-hat over here that plays the 4th 16th. I don't know the official name for it. And this one over here that plays the 2nd. We'll add maybe another 2 hi-hats. I know you're getting sick of them, but this is what it takes. So we'll have one to support the second hi-hat here. We want it to play every second beat. So we'll have this pattern like this. So it's playing a similar pattern to this one, but it's playing half as often. Very subtle, but you know, add something. So call that hat 6, and just add one more. I think it's pretty much there. Okay, we might add something that's sort of a bit that contrasts what we've got so far. So something like this, which sounds completely different to what we've got, but we can use this, say, at the end or somewhere every 2 bars, just to add that interest. So this one I might do 2 bars, and we'll add it on the offbeat. So say here. Sounds a little bit odd, so I'm just going to add some reverb to it. Not too much. Cool, so we added about 6 hi-hats there, but it completely changed the sound. So you know, you compare that, which is just a 1-bar loop, to this. All right. So now that we've done that, we want to add a bit more interest. So we want some stuff to play more often. So what I'm going to do, so the first technique is to add, actually not add anything, but modify what's there to create interest and variation. So I'm going to copy this out to the arrangement view just because it will be easier to visualize. And we'll make it say 8 bars. Okay, so we've got this loop, and we want to look at what we can do in here to make it a bit more interesting. Now, the first thing that I would do is not change the kick, but make a change to it. So if we make this an 8-bar clip, at the end of 8 bars, we can have something happen to add a bit of tension and interest. So you could just remove this here, the last kick. So instead of it playing fully out, you get this, which signifies the start of something new. Or you could do maybe a double kick like this. Or you could even do something completely different like this. I'm going to keep it simple and just remove the kick on the end there. Simplicity often works best. The other thing we can do is add maybe a second clap somewhere. So maybe at the end of 4 bars, we have 2 claps play. That doesn't really sound good to me, so I'm not going to do that. But that is one thing you could do. Hat-wise, I think we're fine. But you could add maybe a sort of frill in here. So if we find a hat, quite a short one, you know, we could add something at the end of 4 bars. Just simple stuff like that. That sounds good to me. And we could do the same with the other hats. I'm going to leave it as is. So yeah, that's the first thing you want to do when you're thinking about interest and variation. Use what already exists to create it first. Because that way you're going to have a much more cohesive sound, and it's just not much work. You don't have to add anything. Cool. So that's that. Now the second technique is the 2-4-8 method. This is a little bit more complicated. So what we're going to do is we want to add everything. We want to add some more stuff. We want to make it more repeatable, the loop. So we want to have something that plays every 2 bars, every 4 bars, and every 8 bars. Why? Because that makes sense. If you had something every 3 bars or every 7 bars and 4/4 time signature, it doesn't really work as well. It sounds unnatural to the listener. So we're going to add a clap that plays every 2 bars. Something like this. It's more of a snare. And we'll have this on the last beat over here. Oops. Actually, what we're going to do, that doesn't sound good. We're going to reverse it and have it lead in to that clap. So we have something like this. So straight away, we've added a bit more to that 2-bar loop, this section here, to make it more interesting. Now we want something that plays every 4 bars. So I'm going to duplicate this out and make it a 4-bar loop. We'll have maybe a snare that plays on the beat, like I was trying to do before. So we get something like this and chuck a fair bit of reverb on it, and we can get this nice sort of effect that adds a bit of tension. And I just realized it's reversed. So there we go, that's something that happens every 4 beats, and now our loop is a 4-beat loop, and by that I mean it's unique for 4 beats. Beyond that, if we play it twice, it's just repeating itself. So we want something that happens every 8 bars, so that someone can listen to it for 8 bars and find something new. Okay. So we kind of have already got something here, which is the lack of kick. But one thing that's very common, especially in modern dance music, is to add like a big snare, a Prada snare, as they call it. So that's what I'm going to do. But I'm not going to use your typical one. I'm going to use maybe a less sort of obvious one. Those are quite big. I like that one there. And I'm just going to add it in as audio, like this. Okay. Okay, so that works all right. It's not perfect, but it's a good example. So we'll name this as snare. And now we've pretty much nailed down the 2-4-8 kind of thing. Now you can add more here. You can have, another thing that plays every 2 bars, another thing that plays every 4 bars, and another thing that plays every 8 bars. But this kind of works well for now, for the sake of simplicity. But I do recommend you use that technique. So the 2-4-8 technique, you want something to happen every 2 bars, another thing to happen every 4 bars, and another thing to happen every 8 bars. That's technique number 2. Now the third technique is playing with velocity. So this is one that a lot of people don't think about, but subtle velocity change can do wonders for your drum loop. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. So I'm going to start with the clap, and basically just going to turn up the velocity on here. You have to be careful if you're turning up the velocity in Ableton anyway, it'll make the volume louder. So you want to pull down the volume first, maybe bring it up to 70% or so, and then change the velocity. So what I'm going to be changing is I want the second clap to be a little bit louder, so I'm going to pull this down here. Now that's very hard to notice. You don't want it to be too noticeable. Like if I put it down to here, that's just stupid. But having it at like 93, you can only just notice it, and it does add a little bit of interest. So copy that up, and we'll leave these two because they're sort of not playing often enough to use velocity well. I'm going to do the same with the hi-hat as well. So I'm going to pull that down, velocity up to around 70%. And what I'm going to do here is pull the first one down a bit, and this will add a bit to the groove. So pull this down to say 90. So as you can hear, or hopefully as you can hear, there's sort of this weak first beat. You know, you've got this more quiet hi-hat followed by a more quiet clap, and the rest of the 1 bar loop is a bit louder, a bit more powerful. So it just adds a bit to the groove. We can do the same with the second hat. Maybe turn this first one down a little bit. We have to add velocity, and that's one thing I should have thought about. When you're adding in your drums, you should have the velocity there by default. Oops. And we can probably use it on here, this little loop. So we could maybe build it up. And this is one thing that's great to do with snare rolls. Perfect. You can also do it on the percussion. And this leads me to another quick side note, and that is ghost notes. So you can have very quiet notes that add to the groove, and people can't really notice them. So for example, I could have a note here that's really quiet. So that's a cool little thing as well, and you can do that with all kinds of sounds. That's velocity, pretty straightforward, very easy to do, and it can make a world of difference. Now already this drum loop sounds a lot different. It's a lot more dynamic, a lot more lively, and so on. So that's technique number 3 for adding interest and variation. The fourth technique is using fills. Now, this is probably the hardest thing to implement, and I'll be the first to admit I'm not great at making them, but using fills in your track can be a great way to add complexity and sort of show off your production chops. So we're going to do that. I'm going to make a really simple one that will happen every 4 bars, and maybe a bit of variation on the second 4 bars. So I'm going to add a drum rack for this, just to keep things simple. I'm going to start by finding a snare, and not a huge snare. So let's have a look in here. I quite like that one. Bit too much reverb on it, but we can live with that. So I'm going to start by looping just this end section here, where we want the fill to happen. So when you're making fills, you really want to focus on the velocity. So, you know, I want to add maybe something in here. Now, if I left it as that, it's not that great. So I'm going to pull these down. I think I'm going to take the percussion out here because it's just sort of clashing. We don't really need it. Or we could build the loop around the percussion, and I think that's a better way to go about it. So we could move, for example, the snare over here. The second thing is automating this. So at the moment, there's hardly any sustain. But I want there to be sustain on this last one at least. So I'm going to push that up. That sounds good to me, and we can add some other sounds here. So I might add a maybe a open sort of hi-hat, like an acoustic one. Or pedal, that sounds good. What else? Let's have a look. I generally like to use acoustic drums for this. Acoustic drum samples. But you can use pretty much everything. If you listen to, the modern dubstep, for example, the fills in that kind of music are insane. Very powerful. You don't even need to use drums either. You can use, say, vocal chops, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to leave it at that because I could spend hours just working on that. But you get the idea. It's really about trial and error, experimentation, and just using sort of unique sounds because you want it to differ to the rest of the drums. These drums here are very modern, clean, dance music like, and then you've got this acoustic kind of fill over here. Sounds a bit too robotic, but that's okay. And then what we could do is change it up over here. So we might have, just a very small sort of change. Something like this. And then keep it going. Just to add that variation. So we're using that 8-bar thing again. Cool. So that's the fourth technique, adding fills, and it's something that you're going to have to practice. It doesn't come easy. Now, the last thing is automating effects. Now, we've got a loop here that is quite interesting, but it could be even more interesting. We haven't added any sort of automation apart from the sustain on the snare drum on this fill. So we can go through and think about what could be automated. Now, straight away, I know that the clap can be automated. We can automate some reverb on this to make it a bit more interesting. So that's what I'm going to do. Add a reverb, automate the dry wet. So let's say we want this second beat here to have a bit of reverb on it. Maybe a bit too much. This clap here is fine, and you want to keep it simple. A lot of people get carried away with automation. On the hi-hat, we could maybe add something like distortion, bit reduction on the last bar, slowly creeping up. So you could have something like this. So it kind of disappears. And you could do similar things with the other hats. And the percussion. You could add a ping-pong delay on this. Maybe like a short one. And automate the decay somewhere, so maybe like here. So you get the idea. There's a ton of things you can do, a ton of effects you can use, but you have to keep simplicity in mind, because if you make your drum loop too complex, it's just going to detract from the rest of your song and all the other instruments you've got. So you want it to be subtle, I suppose complex, but in a subtle sort of way. Like, people won't notice that there's necessarily a slightly low velocity on the first clap, or that there's even a reverb on there, or that in the fill, there's these ghost notes. But when you take them away, people do notice. So you want to add them in and sort of build up this level of complexity. You've got all these layers going on, all these little things that add up to one cohesive sound. So that's adding interesting variation in drums. I hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, just leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, have fun producing.